The second phase of the Bell vs Ottar boss fight was the true culmination of everyone's efforts. After Ryu's level skip, Mia's recruitment, and Hedon's betrayal, now we get to Bell's status update, Haruhime's level ups, and Hedon's secret. All were needed to topple the king known as Ottar, along with his own transformation working against him to bring that defeat ever closer. So, before my channel switches focus to Lord of the Mysteries for the summer, here's all those extra details you may have missed from the epic climax of Season 5. The hard-fought battle between 3 level 7s, 1 pseudo-level 6, and a level 8. The defeat of DanMachi's strongest adventurer, albeit for a mere 5 minutes. To start things off with Phase 1 Ottar, for many who saw him as the epitome of strength, his true worth lay in his defenses. Even with Bell and Mia acting as decoys, a full barrage of 72 orbs of luminous wind still wasn't enough to even face him. Whatever torrent of attacks these three could come up with, Ottar's defense would always be greater. His sturdy limbs and powerful greatsword were too impenetrable. It's not like he just stood there tanking them though, as his technique was so immaculate that it almost seemed like he could see into the future. Like, the way every offensive was handled with the utmost precision was far too unnatural. It was almost like he had some sort of divine shield protecting him. Keep in mind that this was without magic or skills too, so what Bell, Ryu, and Mia were seeing was the result of time. It was an adventurer who'd never stopped polishing themselves, the crystallization of techniques formed over a lifetime of forging. This was a truth only Mia could see because, as someone who witnessed this forging firsthand, only she understood the time and effort Ottar put in to achieve this height. He was a man who no longer attended Folkvanger due to there not being a threat anymore. A man who stopped descending the dungeon because he knew his body was already at its limit. Even if he did explore more than he already had, barely anything, if anything, would be capable of raising his abilities. That being the case, the only thing left to make himself stronger was himself. Ottar would train with himself alone, imagining enemies from the past while refining his technique and mastering his tactics. Only if Freya granted him permission to embark on a trial which risked his life would Ottar ever be able to achieve greater. Until then though, Ottar would have to settle with building himself up as a warrior, the key factor distinguishing himself from the Sword Princess. Where she solely fought monsters in the dungeon, Ottar had honed himself in every way beyond that. It's for that reason the Loki Familia had never been able to crack Ottar. Despite the two having clashed multiple times, Ottar's defenses were just too impenetrable. So much so that even the combined efforts of Tione, Tiona, and Aiz weren't enough to break them. So, it was as they all watched the war game that every single one of them knew Ottar was at the cusp of level 8. This summit that was once held exclusively by the ranks of the Zeus and Hera Familia was now being encroached by the likes of him. In this new era of adventurers, Ottar was the new summit. Now, we already discussed this struggle against base Ottar in the first video, bringing us to his next phase where now he's even stronger. With his level 7 stats already being maxed, that meant this enhanced transformation of his brought him up to level 8. It was common knowledge that bestial transformations such as this provided a full level's worth of strength, thus the saying no race is a match for a werewolf during the full moon. The only difference between Ottar and werewolves like Bet though is that where their transformation is fully situational, Ottar can choose to do his whenever he wants. The trigger for his is completely arbitrary. So, as Ottar exhibited a buff reminiscent of Haruhime's level boost, everyone watching could only stare in awe knowing they were witnessing a level 8. All refused to acknowledge it though, since the moment they did, they knew there would be no point in watching anymore. It was a fearsome thought Ottar would force them to acknowledge immediately after. As if to send the message the battle was in fact over, Ottar would punch the ground barehanded and shatter everything. It was a punch that sent a shockwave far greater than any impact produced so far. The ground rippled from the devastating force of it, and any adventurer not fully prepared was quickly tossed up by the shattering ground racing towards them. In the end, Ottar's punch had reshaped the entire island. He had literally single-handedly produced the biggest quake of the day so far. Now, normally this definitely would have been the end, but once again reinforcements showed up just in time. Though Hedon and Mia were completely unaware of the magic which just enveloped them, their stunned reactions seemed to indicate they knew exactly what it did. So while Bell was getting his status updated to gain all the power he could, Hedin, Ryu, and Mia were all boosted to level 7. Ottar still held the advantage at level 8, but at least now the others could react to his attacks. The only hindrance was that the level up was very hard to control. With all their stats being far greater than it was before, getting a handle on how fast and powerful they'd become was difficult. It required all their mental fortitude to ensure their body acted the way they wanted it to. Much of the initial fight went just like how we saw in the anime, except once again Ryu would incorporate an ability from one of her fallen comrades. As a skill that once belonged to the Estrella familia, Ryu would cast Ray of Endymion, an AoE heal that recovered Mia, Hedin, and even Bell. This, however, only helped partially since though their body was recovered, their mind was still running low. The amount of spells anyone could cast was quickly reaching its limit. That's why we saw Hedin jump into the front since with his magic no longer being the effective support tool he wanted it to be, Hedin knew the best way to fill the gaps was to use himself. Where before he was the party's support, now he was the frontline battle mage. Hedin, Ryu, and Mia weren't the only ones switching things up though, as attacks that would usually be handled via Ottar's absolute defense were now being responded to with his absolute offense. You'd think his bestial transformation would have hindered his intellectual capacity, but still Ottar's tactics were refined as ever. His battle instincts unleashed a relentless assault in which every attack was fatal. As terrifying as that was though, Ryu, Mia, and Hedin knew all they needed to do to overcome that was simply not let Ottar attack. If one hit was all it took to beat them, then keeping him on the defensive meant that was a threat they wouldn't have to worry about. It was a mindset that resulted in attacks from all angles and ranges. Unpredictable movements which in turn made Ottar's attacks hit nothing but air. This was only possible due to their defeat earlier, so as they were now, these 3 level 7s were even with this one level 8. It was an incredible sight Bell could only stare in awe at. To him, they were adventurers far and above himself, but what he failed to see was that they were a lot closer than he thought. It was just a natural assumption considering he'd only just reached level 5. As far as he was concerned, level 7 and 8 wasn't even attainable right now. This, however, isn't quite true though, since with his triple S stats, Haruhime's level boost and the new update from Hestia, Bell could very well be the equivalent of a standard level 7 here. For those wondering just how much his stats went up, the total increase was just over 1,000 across the board. It's certainly not enough to beat Ottar on its own, but perhaps with 3 other level 7s it could be. So Haruhime would boost Bell to level 6, granting him 20 minutes at a level of power he'd never been to before. What then came as a result was a heroic battle in which an impossible peak was in the process of being summited. The attacking party was now strong enough to easily conquer anything found in the deep floors of the dungeon. Even so though, still Ottar found himself completely unfazed by it. There was, however, that one weakness Finn pointed out, and that was something all of them were working towards. You see, Ottar's transformation wasn't perfect. In exchange for being an active trigger skill he could use anytime he wanted, the cost of activation was a massive amount of stamina and mind, while the cost for maintaining it was a level of exhaustion depleting his strength faster than his auto-heal skill could keep up. So, unlike werewolves who once transformed had no downside, Ottar's transformation would eventually lead to his defeat automatically. So long as the fight continued, it was only a matter of time before his strength would run out. So, this was actually Freya's main concern the moment she heard Ottar roar, since it essentially reduced his options to 2. Either he ends the fight and wins the war game quickly, or he finds a way to rest and resets his position. Both didn't seem very likely right now. Still, a disadvantaged position was nothing new to Ottar, since as a man who survived the age of Zeus and Hera, he knew the taste of humiliation better than anyone. You wouldn't know it now, but Ottar was the loser who fought his way to victory. Defeat was never something to stop him. This is the core reason behind why he could keep pushing forward, since despite his body being injured and stamina running out, that exhaustion was simply fuel forcing him to push harder. That being the case, no matter how hard Bell tried and how quick he attacked, Ottar still responded the same way he always did, unrelentingly. This meant Bell just needed to try harder himself, so as he continued fighting with all the odds stacked against him, for the first time Hedin bore witness to what exactly it was Freya loved so much. Though he couldn't see Bell's soul himself, his fighting spirit made clear it was certainly as transparent as Freya said it was, and now that soul was corrupting even him. This just reaffirmed Bell was the only person who could save Freya, since the only word befitting his efforts was heroic. As revolting as it was to think that, Hedin finally knew for certain Bell could be Freya's hero. So it was here in this moment that Hedin finally acknowledged Bell, leading him to use one last attack before Mind Down could consume him. He had no strength to do anything else, so as he saw Ottar charging to finish him off, what Hedin unleashed was a melee range lightning cannon. It was a full strength shock, landing a direct hit on Ottar. Ottar just went on to tank it though, so just like we saw, Hedin got cut down immediately after. Bell would save him, then get enhanced by his Blessing of Lightning, an enchantment which Hedin was incapable of casting on himself. The reason we never saw him use it on anyone before is because this Blessing of Lightning could only be cast on those he acknowledged. So with Bell finally being one of those rare few, Hedin's Loris Hildur would power up Bell even more. The result was a series of attacks one could only describe as lightning, since in a single second Bell was able to deal 44 slashes consecutively. Ottar still defended all of them, but by the time he could realize why that was a mistake, the damage was done and his body electrified. You'd think this would have been something Ottar was already aware of, but Hedin's third magic was a secret only Freya knew. She was the only one aware that, in addition to speed, this buff also granted absurd strength and the ability to penetrate. Most of the time it's not very practical though, since the requirement for its usage is every bit of mind within Hedin. That being the case, the only times when it would be justified is when Mind Down was inevitable, an occurrence unique to a battle like this one. In exchange, Bell was granted armor made of lightning, speed comparable to Ice's aerial, and power far greater than that of typical enchantments. Then, to top it all off, its penetrative effects meant Bell could do damage through Ottar's defense. It truly was the best possible counter against him. Any attempt to fight against it would easily be evaded too, since Hedin's buff also improved the speed at which he could perceive things. It was a level of enhancement fundamentally different from what Haruhime's level boost usually did. This gave Bell confidence unlike any other, since now he felt like he could do anything. It was in this moment that he felt he could go anywhere and defeat any enemy. His mind was accelerating the same way his body was. This just forced Ottar to try even harder, since after being pushed back, Ottar started turning the tables once again. You see, with the combination of his eyes, brute strength, mental fortitude, and adventurer experience, Ottar refined himself in a way that allowed him to best respond to this new Bell. In practically an instant, he had fully adapted to the new threat in front of him. It was then that Bell would find this fight extremely nostalgic, since just like his fight with Asterios, both were fighting not to lose. For Bell, that wasn't all he was fighting for though, so as hurtful as it was to his pride, Bell knew he needed to call for the assistance of Ryu and Mia. Alone, he knew Ottar was unbeatable, but together was where Bell knew he had a chance. So, the trio would attack just like how we saw in the anime, leading to the trap Bell would create using the advice Fan had given him. Mia was the only one to notice this was Bell's intent from the get-go, resulting in her being the first to exploit the massive opening it created. Ryu was next, then Bell, who had completed a 60-second charge of his limit off Grand Bell attack. The result was a massive explosion which would engulf everyone, a new move the novel referred to as Vorpal Fang. With Ottar being the recipient, he would be sent flying and brought to his knees. This is where Ottar would grant Bell the opportunity he was fighting for, since finally Bell had spoken the only language Ottar would ever understand. In his world where strength was the only thing that mattered, Bell had used his to send the message he wanted loud and clear, a message which would earn him 5 minutes only. This was all Ottar needed to make a recovery, so after all that fighting and all that sacrifice, everyone's combined efforts resulted in that. All they had earned was this brief period of time, after which Ottar stated he would continue his hunt again. But yeah, That's pretty much it for the fated showdown between Belle and Ottar. I figured I should finish this before moving on, so if you like the DanMachi content, then feel free to leave a like. Now, with Lord of the Mysteries confirmed to be coming to Crunchyroll, that's the anime I'm going to be focusing on next. If you're confused as to what that even is, then check out my video giving a quick explanation on it. It's an isekai that could very well become one of the best. So, until the next video on that, ciao!